everybody, I'm Joe. Our today's question is, what was life like for slaves in the early 1800s?
Okay guys, now before we get started into our read aloud, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a history lesson so that you can help better understand the story that we're going to be reading and singing for you. Back in the early 1800s, in the northern states, slavery was not legal. Where in the southern states, slavery was legal. So the slaves, who were treated very, very poorly, would go out of their way to try to go north, up into Canada, where they knew they'd be free. Because even if they made it into the northern states, there were still slave hunters that would try to catch them and sell them back to their owners in the south. So the goal for a slave here was to escape from their plantations, go north, and if they could, get all the way into Canada, where they knew they would be free.
Hey everybody, it's Joe again. Did you ever see this in the night sky? Do you know what it is? That's right, the Big Dipper. Let me teach you a trick about the Big Dipper. See these two stars right here? If you follow those two pair of stars, it will lead to another star, and that star is the North Star.
Alright, hi again. Just wanted to go over a few more things before we got started. And that was, back in the 1840s when slaves were going to run away, they needed to make sure they were speaking in code, because if they didn't, the slave owners would easily be able to tell they were trying to run away. So, for example, the biggest example of all is this right here, the Underground Railroad. Did you know that's not a railroad at all? In fact, it's a series of houses put together where the slaves would travel from house to house to house until they made it to freedom. So, by calling it a railroad, they would be throwing off the slave owners into looking for a railroad, when really it was just slave sympathizers that would give up their houses in danger in order to help these slaves escape. Another thing that you want to know is, like our friend Joe told us, was about the Big Dipper. Well, the code for the Big Dipper is the drinking gourd. So in the song you're going to hear us say, "Follow the drinking gourd." And what that really means is look towards the Big Dipper so we can find the North Star. And if we follow that star, we know we're heading north towards freedom. And the last one we're going to go over is the line, "When the sun comes back and the first quail calls." That's really code for leave during the springtime. In the early days of slavery in the United States, many slaves tried to escape their cruel bondage by fleeing north, usually to Canada, to freedom. By the 1840s, a loosely organized group of free blacks, slaves, and white sympathizers formed a secret network of people and places that hid escaped slaves on their dangerous journey to freedom. A network that came to be known as the Underground Railroad. Traveling along darkened roads at night, hiding out by day, moving slowly upriver along hundreds of miles of connecting waterways, the fugitive slaves endured many hardships. Slave catchers hunted them down with dogs. Many were shot or hanged. And even after crossing into the free states, runaway slaves could still be captured and returned to their masters for a reward. The most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad was, you guessed it, Harriet Tubman, a runaway slave herself, who led hundreds of her people to freedom. Among other conductors, there was a one-legged sailor named Peg-Leg Joe. Joe hired himself out to plantation owners as a handyman. Then he made friends with the slaves and taught them what seemed like a harmless folk song, "Follow the Drinking Gourd." But hidden in the lyrics of the song were directions for following the Underground Railroad. The drinking gourd is the Big Dipper, which points to the North Star. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls meant spring, when travel might be the least hazardous. As the runaway slaves followed the stars north, they would come across marks Peg-Leg Joe had made in the mud or in charcoal on dead trees, a left foot and a peg foot, and they would know they were on the right trail. The river that ends between two hills was the Tombigbee River. The second was the Tennessee River, and the Great Big River was the Ohio River. where Peg-Leg Joe would be waiting to ferry them across to the free states on the other side. From there, the fugitives were guided from one hiding place to the next until, with luck, they made it to Canada or other safe places in the north. Follow the Drinking Gourd. Story and pictures by Jeanette Winter.
Long ago, before the Civil War, there was an old sailor called Peg-Leg Joe who did what he could to help free slaves.
Joe had a plan. He'd use a hammer, nail, and saw.
And work for the master, the man who owned slaves on the cotton fields.
Joe had a plan. At night, when work was done, he'd teach the slaves a song that secretly told the way to freedom. Just follow the drinking gourd, it said. When the song was learned and sung all day, Peg-Leg Joe would slip away to work for another master and teach the song again. One day, a slave called Molly saw her man James sold to another master. James would be taken away, their family torn apart. Just one more night together. A quail called in the trees that night. Molly and James remembered Joe's song. They sang it low. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd, for there's an old man waiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. They looked to the sky and saw the stars.
Taking their little son Isaiah, old Hattie, and her grandson George, Molly and James set out for freedom. That very night, followed the stars of the drinking gourd.
They ran all night through the fields till they crossed the stream to the woods.
When daylight came, they hid in the trees, watching, listening for the master's hounds set loose to find them.
But the dogs lost the runaway scent at the stream, and Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and young George were not found. They hid all day in the woods.
At night, they walked again, singing Joe's song and looking for the signs that marked the trail.
The riverbank makes a very good road. The dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on if you follow the drinking gourd. Walking by night, sleeping by day, for weeks they traveled on. Sometimes berries to pick and corn to snatch, sometimes fish to catch, sometimes empty bellies to sleep on, sometimes no stars to guide the way. They never knew what lay ahead. There was danger from men who would send them back, and danger from hungry beasts. But sometimes a kind deed was done.
One day, as they hid in a thicket, a boy from a farm found them. In a bag of feed for the hogs in the woods, he brought bacon and corn to share. Singing low, they traveled on.
The river ends between two hills. Follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side if you follow the drinking gourd. On and on they followed the trail to the river's end. From the top of the hill they saw the new path, another river beneath the stars, to lead them to Freedom Land. The drinking gourd led them on. The song was almost done. When the great big river meets the little river,
Then they climbed the last hill. Down below was Peg-Leg Joe, waiting at the wide Ohio River to carry them across.
Their spirits rose when they saw the old man. Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and George ran to the shore. Under a starry sky, Joe rowed them across the wide Ohio River. He told them of hiding places where they would be safe. A path of houses stretched like a train on a secret track leading north to Canada. He called it the Underground Railroad. It carried riders to freedom. The first safe house stood on the hill. The lamp was lit, which meant it was safe to come. Ragged and weary, they waited, while Joe signaled low with a hoot of an owl. Hoo! Hoo! Then the door opened wide to welcome the freedom travelers. They were rushed through the house to the barn, for the farmers knew there were slave catchers near.
A trapdoor in the floor took them under the barn to hide till it was safe to move on. Then Peg-Leg Joe went back to the river to meet others who'd followed the drinking gourd.
With danger still near, too close for ease, the farmer sent the 5 travelers on. He drew a map that showed the way north, on the midnight road, to the next safe house, just over 2 hills.
This time, James caught the signal and hooted like an owl. Hoo! Hoo! That opened the door to a Quaker's farm. The travelers were led to a secret room hidden behind the shelves.
They rested here for many days and healed their wounds. Soft beds, full meals, new clothes, hot baths washed away some fear and pain. Isaiah smiled.
When they were strong, they traveled again from house to house on the Underground Railroad trail, still following the drinking gourd north.
Sometimes they traveled on foot, sometimes by cart. The wagon they rode near their journey's end carried fruit to market and the runaway slaves to freedom.
At last they come to the shore of Lake Erie. Molly and James and Isaiah and old Hattie and young George climbed aboard the steamship that would carry them across to Canada to freedom.
5 more souls are safe, old Hattie cried. The sun shone bright when they stepped on land. They had followed the drinking gourd. Follow